the Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the show where we explore how empathy, connection, purpose transforms business from the inside out. I'm Stephen, joined by my co-host, Tullio. And according to a 2024 study by Catalyst, employees who report having empathetic leaders are more than 3 times as likely to be happy at work and over twice as likely to stay. And yet, many leaders still treat empathy as optional rather than essential. Today's conversation is about challenging that mindset. We're joined by a guest who has built his leadership playbook around listening deeply, staying curious, putting people first, and even in high performance environments. Tullio, introduce our guest today.
Yes, very excited to have our guest today is Glenn Poulos, a seasoned entrepreneur. He's a keynote speaker and also the author of Never Sit in the Lobby, as well as 57 winning sales factors to grow a business and build a career selling. Glenn draws from over 3 decades of experience building high-performing teams and scaling businesses, including his role as a co-founder and vice president of Gap Wireless. Throughout his writing, speaking, and leadership, Glenn helps professionals move beyond service-level tactics to develop lasting success rooted in trust, empathy, and consistency. His approach blends actionable sales strategy with a human-first mindset that challenges conventional leadership norms. Glenn, welcome to the show. To kick things off, would love to learn a little bit more about your journey, especially behind the Never Sit in the Lobby, and what brought empathy to the forefront of your leadership philosophy.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Tullio and Stefan and or Stephen. And I can't remember how you pronounce it exactly, but I'm originally from Canada, and half of them are Stephen, the other half are Stefan, right? So, the first part of your question was, can you just repeat it? Was it about how I got into the business, or and
tell us about your journey that led to this, your book, Never Sit in the Lobby, and then also
the book, right? Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Embraced empathy as part of your leadership philosophy.
That's right. Yeah, so the book came out of I joined the sales world, and now I clicked over in 2025 to 40 years, 4 decades, because I started in sales in 85, and it's 2025 now. So prior to that, I was a failed government civil servant. I got kicked out of the government for working too hard. And my boss said, "You got no business being here. You're making everyone look bad." And he said, go get a job in sales. Right. So I did. And essentially back in, starting in 85. And from then on, I started learning from mentors and coworkers and competitors, and I'd see what they were doing. And I would sort of take note of the good things they were doing well, the things they were doing wrong. And I started writing them down. I started making up stories, started relating those stories. And, and when I tell stories, I try to tell them in kind of like a over the top, funny kind of a way, because I find that usually leads the biggest impact. People kind of remember the punchline, and then they end up remembering the lesson. Right. So started writing them down, and people asked me to start repeating these stories at their sales meetings or what have you. And they were, suggesting I write a book over the years. And I never really did until the pandemic came along. And at that time I was in Canada, and we were really locked down. And so had nothing to do. And I thought, hey, what better time now than to get those words down on paper? And that's when I wrote the book. And I published it. And coincidentally, my second major business that I had founded and run, the same week that I sold the business to private equity was the same week the book got published on Amazon in February of 2022. And it was a good week. And that's kind of what led me to writing the book, and when the book sort of came about, and I can fill in little bits and pieces about the book as we talk. And then regarding empathy, it's just something that sort of evolved naturally. I had a business from 91 through the early 2000s. And then I got an opportunity to start Gap Wireless business. And I really wanted to change some of the ways we interacted with customers and people. And I have this sort of philosophy of always wanting to be a pleasure to do business with. And so, and like I always tell people is that, myself and my business partner, we grew the business, to be, quite successful, and we were able to sell it. And, but we had competitors that also had very successful businesses. The key difference was they were not a pleasure to do business with. They were equally successful. Like it's not like, being a pleasure gets you more money or anything like that. But it makes me feel better. Right. And I'm very attuned to how people feel, how I make them feel, how and that is really the crux behind empathy and what have you. And so, I'm a big proponent of it. I talk about it in the book. And then the adjuncts to empathy about how you practice empathy and, listening and things like that. And what have you. And so that's kind of how empathy came to be in my, vocabulary, right? And my day-to-day practice. And happy to dig into any of the details of any of that. And, as you see fit. So.
Yeah, I hope you mentioned some good stories. So I hope we pull out a couple of those sales stories you've got during this process. But, so sales often gets this kind of reputation for being transactional or aggressive. And I think that's not a pleasure to do business with, right? When it's like that is what you're talking about. So, you spent a career, thinking about customer relationships and thinking about, empathy and that. How has all that kind of shaped your role as a leader? Or do you lead first with the empathy, or how is this part of your DNA?
I like to think so. And so people are often like, what's a pleasure to do business with or whatever. And I'm like, it's when you're not a pain in the ass, right? It's like when you don't suck. And don't suck, because sometimes it's about the company, but oftentimes I'm talking to an individual, right? And so I, on a one-on-one, like keeping it at the personal level, I'm always trying to teach people how to get, act, and stay in front of their customers, and to be a pleasure to do business with always, even in the face of loss or, equipment breakdown or any kind of challenging moment. And those are obviously those actually become the biggest moments of opportunity in order to become a pleasure to do business with. It's counterintuitive, but it's true. And so people are always like, well, how would you be a pleasure to do business with? And like I say, don't be a pain in the ass. Right. And so, and don't throw a hissy fit when you lose the deal. Right. But I have other related rules that I follow, and that come some of these 57 tips in the book and whatever that protect me and my, my being and my financial, well-being and whatever in the face of being a pleasure to do business with. I also have to be, it has to fit in with the business and making money and, not giving it all away. Right. Like that. So there's a lot of puts and takes and things like that in relation to it. But I'm always trying to put myself in the customer's shoes and, and figure out where they're coming from. And I found that's the best way of interacting with them. And so.
Glenn, a lot of what you do relates to sales. And there's this mindset quite often in sales that, the empathy stuff, that's nice everywhere else. But sales, you got a high accountability, high pressure, you got to make goals. So there's this mindset sometimes where you have to throw that out in order to be more accountable. And so it feels like adopting empathy is at odds with accountability. At least some people, a lot of leaders think that way. We don't agree with that thinking, by the way, but you said it, one of the most effective ways to lead is empathy. But how do you balance care with also high standards, especially in sales? Like what have you found what's the formula there for salespeople who might be like, I want to be empathetic, but I also need to make things happen. I got to drive things forward.
Right. Okay. Well, so backing up to what you sort of said at the beginning, right? About, you got to produce or something like that. And, and balancing, it's high pressure and the thing about, like, in order to really be successful though, like really, when you boil it all down, is that the more empathy you can practice, the better you obviously understand what's going on with the customer. And it's only through that knowledge that you can position your products in a way that create the feeling in the customer that makes them want to buy it, right? Like you can't buy it. You can't convince them to buy it because you're lecturing them or, acting like they're stupid because they don't know. You don't realize we got the best, discombobulator in the planet or whatever. And how everybody's dying to get these things. I always start from a position with our customers of getting as deep as possible and understanding what do they make and how do they make money and how does what they do make, how does it all work, and really truly getting inside of it and understanding it, because most people kind of get it wrong and they don't learn about the customer well enough. And they're kind of just like want to jump into the features and benefits, and hopefully they hit the right ones first, or, and the system and the, presentation doesn't time out before you've hit the right one. Whereas when you go in and you realize, like I actually don't have a great example right off the top of my head, but, let's say there's a company, that makes needles or something like that or whatever, but really it's a special needle that delivers a special drug that cures cancer, right? I mean, it's like, do they make needles or do they cure cancer, right? Like, I mean, you need to understand the company at its deepest level so that you can figure out how to apply what you do to their, rather than try and just be bragging about what you do, right? And so that's part of it. And I to be honest, I kind of lost track. There was a lot in your question, so there were some other things you were asking me that I might not have touched on. So if you want to just,
it's okay. It was more about like how you help people balance that mindset, where high performance and empathy at the same time, because some things.
Okay, right. Yes, of course. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I find that, like care and standards equals great leadership, right? You're combining empathy with accountability, and, you support the people without lowering the bar, right? You're challenging them because you care. Like those are the and so how do I do it? Or what are some examples? How does it fit in? It would be sort of like, setting clear expectations, but staying human, right? Being upfront about the goals and deadlines. But if they're struggling, try to get inside and figure out why before reacting, right? Like sell or you're fired, like you don't want to be doing that, right? You want to be giving honest feedback with kindness, right? And like that's where that's where, to me, like the word truth is honesty plus kindness, right? And I mean, the example I often give is, if somebody's struggling with their weight or whatever, right? I mean, just saying you're fat is just not, like, yes, it's the truth. They are fat, right? But I mean, you want to be blending the two things together in order to get the message across well, right? In my opinion. So, and I mean, when you're dealing with salespeople, you want to be praising the efforts and not just the outcomes, right? Because there's in sales we have this word called bluebirds, right? Which the thing just flew in the door, right? And of course they're a hero and they get $1 million order and everyone's, he's a superstar, she's a superstar, whatever. But really, it's a bluebird, right? And I mean, but then there's the other guy who really got to know a customer, turned around a competitive challenge, sold 10 of something, not one of something, at 100K. He had $1 million, she had $1 million, whatever deal. Quite a different situation, right? And or it might only be 10 of something at 10K for 100K order versus a guy who gets $1 million bluebird, right? So you're praising the efforts, not just the outcomes, right? And and in the end, you're just really trying to hold people accountable, but with fairness, right? And so and you want to be following through on the standards, but showing respect for the whole team and not just one person.
Absolutely.
Some of the conversations I've had with like really good salespeople, at least the ones that I connect with, there's always this topic of kindness that comes up with what they're doing. Would you say that's like if you really want to build a meaningful relationship, that's like one of the foundations to sales.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I used that, a few times in my last, in the soliloquy I just gave you guys, on some of the stuff to me, it's always sort of the honesty plus kindness, right? And so, it does matter how you say it. It does matter in the environment you present it. There's so many like mitigating factors with where people are at when you're meeting them. And it's good to be able to, like, you still have to hold people to standards, but you can be understanding at the same time, right? Like, someone may be struggling at work, but they've got issues around personal requirements. Maybe they're a single parent or something like that, or, they've had some other kind of setback, and they have the ability to perform, and they're making efforts and what have you, but they maybe need special dispensation in some way in order to get around a particular problem. Now, but I'm not suggesting coddling either, right? Like I have this one of the chapters, the 57 tips, is like freedom begins with no, right? And so it's one of my golden rules, and I always follow it, right? And it's like, what do you mean freedom begins with no? And I'm like, well, all your problems start in life when you say yes to something, right? When you say no, it becomes it's a complete sentence, right? As we all like to say, no is a complete sentence. And usually you don't have to do anything after you've said no. But when you say yes to someone, that's when your problems begin. And one of the examples I give is, we come up with a great deal for a customer. We get it all the way to the deal line, and the salesperson, goes down to the customer sort of to present the final T's and C's of it all and whatever. And the VP of procurement walks in and says, that's great, but I'm going to need another 3% to make this deal happen, right? And a lot of salespeople would say, oh, well, I can't say that, but I have to go back to the office and talk to my boss, which in a way is saying, yes, I'll go and see what I can do, right? And so notice how the customers now put all the weight back on the salesperson, and that person has all the work ahead of them to drive back, realize they're going to get yelled at from the boss for like, why did you even entertain this? Whereas if you had said, well, no, sir, like, I mean, and obviously you have to say it no, and you have to be prepared inside the situation you're in, but say, we had presented our best deal, and, you're pressuring us for delivery by September. That it's 8 weeks delivery. We're already up against the delivery window. So, we've come in with our best and most fair price, and, we've given you the best delivery possible. And if I don't get an order today, you're not going to get delivery on time to start your this or begin your that or whatever. In other words, it's a fancy way of saying no. And notice how your effort then stops. Now it goes back to the customer to either say yes, or if they want to say no, they can say no within the context of the conditions that you've told them, or the consequences, right? And so, anyways, so yeah.
That's an interesting dilemma quite often, in being able to push back. And I think also there's empathy there in realizing that sometimes they're just programmed to say that, right?
Yeah.
Just keep pushing. Yeah. It's almost like it's not even about business sense in some cases.
Well,
let me see what I can get. Let me see what else I can get, right?
Well, exactly. And so another one that's not related to sorry. Yeah. The other one that's not related to same story, but not related to sales, right? But is more personal, that's universally applicable to everyone that's listening or what have you, and everyone that they know about freedom begins with no, is the phone bill analogy that I always tell, right? Where it's like, and this actually happened to me. And so, it's kind of an evolution of this story where, I went to this town and with family members that I knew and in-laws and such. And they're like, oh, thank God you're here. And I'm like, why? And like, what's the big deal why I'm here? And they're like, oh, well, I can't pay my phone bill. And I'm like, oh, okay. And they're like, you're the only one that can bail me out. And if not, my phone's going to get cut off. Right. And I mean, to make a long story short, because there's a lot of ins and outs of it, and I can embellish the story, but the reality is that there were times where some of those people, I did actually give them the money and paid the phone bill. And that's how I learned the lesson, which was that the next day they couldn't buy groceries and I was gone. And somehow they were able to cobble together whatever they did to make sure they got the groceries. And then 4 weeks later, I was back for something else. They're like, oh my God, thank God you're here. Like my gas is going to get cut off. I need you to pay my gas bill. And like, giving them the money doesn't change their environment, right? Like nothing changes. You're just changing a finite moment in time for them. And you're not really practicing empathy or really compassion, right? Because compassion, there's sympathy, empathy, and compassion, right? And so empathy evolves into compassion where you want to like solve the problem for the person, right? But that doesn't solve the problem for them because the problem will exist before, during, and after while you're there, right? And so in those situations, that's where I learned. And I remember back when I was a kid, I used to say this, hey, you want to go to the movies? And they're like, well, no, I can't. I'm like, why not? And they're like, I can't afford it. And to me, when I was a kid, I can't afford it was a complete answer, right? It was like, no one ever said, well, ask someone else for the money or whatever. When someone says, I can't afford it from where I came from, it meant shut up and don't ask me again because I don't have any money, right? And so that's where I learned the freedom begins with no, and the whole concept of it. And in a way, I'm actually helping them, and I am showing empathy, in my opinion, because I would actually rather help them to figure out how to raise their standards in some way that they can pay their own phone bills and pay to go to the movies or whatever on their own, because there isn't going to be a guy driving in from out of town all the time to solve their problems, right? Yeah. So anyway, sorry, I ran a little over time.
Saying, on that one, teach someone how to fish, they'll eat for life. Or
yes, exactly.
Fish taste for the day.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I understanding in the sales process that no is definitely. I like the way you frame it with freedom begins there. Thinking about your work at Gap Wireless and thinking about this concept of emotionally intelligent leadership and systems of compassion, which we always talk about here. Can you think of anything off the top of your head, like where you ensured like empathy is a part of your daily operations? How do you kind of operationalize some of this so that it's a repeatable, part of your culture?
So, yeah. So I'm not sure this is a direct answer, but it's a good one. It just popped into my head. And so one of the things I realized early on was that because I was the boss, right? I had a lot of people that came to me, and I had to basically either my door was open or my door was closed, right? And it was like, if it was closed, it was because I was in a meeting. And if not, as soon as the meeting was over, I would go and I would open the door again, right? And not everyone does it, but I had my door's always open thing. And if it's open, it meant you could come and knock on the door and knock and walk in, and I would talk to you, right? No matter whether you drove the tow motor in the warehouse or, you were the VP of finance, it didn't matter. Right. And so, but, years ago, I learned that I did a small change, which I felt changed the dynamic of the way people related with me. And I noticed that a lot of my underlings and coworkers never really adopted it. And as much as even though I shared it, which I moved the chairs from the front of my desk to behind my desk. And so in other words, nowadays you got your monitors kind of in front of you or whatever over here, and you have your chair over there in front of your desk and people you kind of talking to the side of your monitor. I took the chair and I put it beside me so that we were both literally could look at my monitors. And obviously I'm not going to have the payroll, system up while they're sitting there, or anything confidential, but they would see what I was seeing. And I removed the barrier of the desk, and I'd have all the conversations I would turn my chair kind of to the right. And so my body was kind of fully exposed. I had nothing in between me, no vanity, plate on my desk, nothing, no monitors, no computer to hide behind, anything like that. I was fully exposed, as were they. And I found that it broke down the barriers, and it allowed a level of closeness and that you couldn't otherwise get. And I mean, I don't know, it just worked, right? And And so that was something I've always practiced. And I always counsel managers to like turn their stuff around in their office so that when people walk in, they can see everything you're seeing. And, it becomes a reflection on what, and obviously you need to have certain, if you're the payroll clerk, it might be different, right? But I mean, I think you understand what I'm saying, right?
No, yeah.
And,
if you have, like you're talking about the open door, closed door, that's like a physical barrier, right? Between connection, and then even the desk between you, it's another physical barrier between like a connection with someone. And so people, may not notice it as well. So thinking about, I want to talk a little bit about purpose. It's something we always talk about on the show.
Sure.
But first we've got a question from a LinkedIn user who says, your bio says you're a newly adopted AI junkie. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So I'm actually working on a couple new things. And so I sold my business in 2022. I worked for private equity for 3 years, and I finished with them at the end of the last year. And I bought a business similar to the business I was running in Canada, but in another country, in another industry, but a similar business. And it's sort of my third time of doing it, but this time I'm doing it all by myself. I had partners in my other two businesses. But in addition to that, I've partnered with a Canadian firm bringing some of their AI technology to the market in the US, and where we're selling sort of agentic model solutions to customers. And so I really have two gigs. One is a side gig, one is kind of a day job. And I bought a business and I'm doing this complete startup in the AI field, right? And so we go into companies and we look for repetitive processes, typically in the areas of the engineering department and the sales department. So in the sales department, what I mean by that is I work with companies like construction companies and other companies that get a lot of tenders and RFPs they need to respond to that often have a lot of technical drawings and other complicated things that they got to analyze in order to produce the RFP, right? And then our systems can reside deep within your, AWS servers or your Azure environment or whatever. And it can learn everything you've ever done as a business, right? A 20-year-old construction company. And these businesses would say, show me how you've, successfully, built a bridge with, 3 stanchions and whatever, like something like that, where the guy doing the RP might never even know that 17 years ago you built one, a triple stanchion, whatever, something bridge, but the model can learn all that and pull all this. And what we end up doing is reducing the RFP response time significantly and automating, upwards of 80-85% of it. And also it allows you, sorry.
I was going to say, I think we've seen AI really working on some of those repetitive tasks in the sales side of things. It's really been growing the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Great.
Tullio, you said we got another. Go for it.
We got, this is a great one. What advice would you give your 30-year-old self about leading people? My first question is, what makes you assume he's not 30 years old? Great question, Mark.
My 30-year-old self of what, though? What was the question, though?
What advice would you give your 30-year-old self about leading people?
Oh, about leading people. Okay.
If you went back in a time capsule and you gave us, what would that be? What advice would you give yourself?
Well, so 2 things. One, at some point, sometimes in these podcasts, it's like, what is your thing you want to tell everyone or what have you? And so I'll share that now because I'm usually talking to a 30-year-old when I tell them this rule, and it's in the book as well. But the chapter's called, You Only Get Forever to Make Another Impression. And so, and what I mean by that is that, it's like, wait a minute, that's not what my mom said. My mom told me I got to make a good first impression. And I'm like, that's right. She was right. But she didn't tell you the whole story, which is every impression is a first impression. And they can be life-changing. They can be, career-altering at any moment in time. Despite how good you looked on the first day you met someone 20 years ago, you can change and so I'm counseling young people to always be working at 120% when they're in an environment where people can notice it. And it's almost gamifying the situation, right? And what I tell them is like when the CEO's walking by, be doing something that looks really interesting, and ask them a question. Say, hey, you know what? I'm working on this crazy awesome deal. I'd love to pick your brain for 2 minutes. Can I get, and of course, maybe it's not the CEO, maybe it's a VP of something or other or whatever. But when people that can govern your career are in the environment, always be at 110%. Never be on your social media, never be, none of those things. You might be on those later on your break or whatever when you're private, but when you're, in an environment where people are observing what you're doing, always be clocking at 110%, especially at things like trade shows and stuff like that, because those are the moments where the higher ups that govern how your career advances see you and decide who they're going to elevate. And so, especially if you're in sales, especially like the trade shows, is the golden opportunity for career advancement, because most of your cohort that you work with will tell everyone my feet are sore. They'll sneak out of the booth. They'll show up late. They won't set up the booth. They'll leave early. They won't tear it down. Right? Me, I'm there early. I'm always there. I always help set up if I'm attending a show, and I always tear down. I always help people tear down to the maximum extent possible. I don't leave the booth. I don't sneak away. If it's slow, I'll stand in the aisle and I'll pull people in. And if it's really slow and there's no one walking by or whatever, if there's any like product managers, marketing managers from other divisions, international parts of the companies or whatever that you're working with, I'll go to all their heads of the departments. I'll say, what makes your piece better? What makes this? Why is this so great? What do I need to know? What are the top 5 things? And always be on. And then a year from now, when they're looking for a guy to head up their operations in Miami, they're like, that Glenn guy's incredible, never stops. Versus the people that snuck out of the booth and were forgotten about. And so that's one thing I always tell my 30-year-old selves that walk by. But that's about leading people.
Good advice. It's very good advice. I mean, don't be on social media unless you're a social media manager. Then you need to be.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
But and also the after-hour party, be the first one to leave. That's always been my advice. Don't be the last one.
Yeah. And
notice the CEOs don't stay till the end. They usually leave early. So let's talk a little bit about purpose. One of the questions we often ask is the impact that being purposeful has on both a business as well as a leader. And in fact, PwC did a study that shows that employees who feel their work is connected to a larger purpose are typically 2.3 times more likely to be engaged, especially since we have a highly disengaged workforce today. It's like a worldwide epidemic. So what purpose drives you personally? And, how does that show up in how you lead and what you do? So the one thing that I always pride myself on is like, if you ask me a question, I'm going to have to always give you the honest answer, right? Even if it gets me in an uncomfortable position of like, why this or who that or whatever, right? And so you're saying like, what's my purpose? So my purpose is not being poor. That's my purpose. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say that I want to build, schools in Africa. I mean, maybe one day I might actually, but right now I'm just trying to avoid poverty, right? I've been married and divorced. I have 3 of my own kids. I have 2 stepkids. I have 5 kids under my control. They're all over 20 and they all still need my money. I have businesses to support. I have employees. My last company, we had a large number of people. Now I'm doing another, it's not a startup. I bought an existing business, but I'm trying to keep it going. And everything I do is governed around the thing is like, could this decision bankrupt my business or what have you, right? And there's a good story earlier on when I sold my first company, how I ended up losing everything and had to start over again from scratch. And I went from multimillionaire to zero and had to build my way back up. And they're like, how did you do it? And I'm like, well, fear of poverty, right? And again, I'm not trying to be funny or whatever. It's just that I don't have a better answer for you about what's my higher purpose other than that, right? And I actually love that answer, because we often talk about the purpose doesn't have to be this lofty, big thing. It could be something as simple as.
Well, I do think, like Glenn talks about having to provide for his family as part of that purpose.
That is definitely purposeful, right? Especially if someone's gone through that. It's a difficult thing to recover from, having lost everything. I know what you're talking about for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, and providing for the family is more an opportunity. It's a higher purpose, but it's also God giving me the opportunity to practice the power of the freedom of begins with no, right? And so because they're the ones that come knocking most of the time, right? But I digress with a bit of humor, but still it's true in some ways.
So, one question we always ask on this show is really around compassion and love in business. What role do you think love and compassion plays in business?
Well, so I'm always very big on definitions, right? And so I'm not sure why, like I'm not trying to challenge you too much, but why you have love and compassion as sort of the same sort of sentence. I kind of treat them very separately, right? For me,
if you want to treat love differently, sometimes I put that in there because people are confused a little bit about just the love.
But we're not talking about romantic love.
Okay, fine. I hear what you're saying. Okay, fine. So, like for me, the compassion is part of the three tenets, right, of caring, right, which is like sympathy, empathy, and compassion, right? And I'm always telling people, like, learn what they mean and learn what you're like. Don't tell me that you're empathetic, right? First of all, I find that word to be so hard to say. I always like to say showing or practicing empathy or whatever, rather than saying I'm empathetic. And you're pathetic, all right. And so in some ways, right, at times, but again, I'm trying to be funny, but sympathy, empathy, and compassion, right? And so, sympathy is just like understanding someone else's, feeling sad for someone else's misfortune. Oh, poor bugger, lost everything. That sucks, right? So empathy actually, is really literally like stopping everything. The way I explain to people to do it is like stop everything that you're doing and climb into that person's shoes, and then mentally lose everything and figure out how that feels. And that's empathy, right? And you need to like feel what they feel, right? Like that's really what empathy means. And when you do that, that's when it gives you the opportunity to practice compassion, which is the sympathy plus empathy, right? Which is the desire to want to alleviate someone's suffering, right? That's what compassion is. And yes, it could come out of some kind of love or, some adjunct of love in a way, right? And so for me, compassion is the natural evolution of practicing sympathy and empathy in their appropriate roles. And then, to the extent that it's reasonable or doable in some way, trying to alleviate someone's suffering, right? So that's my answer.
Beautiful. All right. Well, it's been really great to have you with us, Glenn. Time flies really fast. We're already like almost 40 minutes in. So curious to see how can listeners get to know you, connect with you. What's the best way that they can do that?
So, most of what I do is on LinkedIn, and that's where the lion's share of it is. Of course, there's a website, glennpoulos.com, for my book, and you can go to Amazon and buy the book if you'd like, and that would be nice. But but if you want to interact with me, connect with me, and exchange any kind of messaging or whatever, LinkedIn's the most easiest way to do that. And I'm quite accessible, and I'm on LinkedIn every day, and that would be the best way.
All right, thanks, Glenn, for joining us today. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Please follow, share this episode, and we will see you next time on the Bliss Business Podcast.